The first guy shot, and the bear did what bears do when they're hit but not killed real fast. Whipped around, snarled, biting at his ribs. The other two guys joined in. The bear pinpointed the sound, and then the guys, and came for him from 200 yards. Now, I'm sure that all the shots didn't connect, but these rifles held 3 or 4 down, 300 H&H, which is tapered case. You can often get 4 into the magazine of a Model 70 Winchester. They all 3 emptied their guns on this incoming bear and didn't stop him.
Hi there, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 368 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Today I am joined once again by Joseph von Benedikt. Joseph hosts the Backcountry Hunting Podcast and also has a well-known affinity for classic cartridges. To that end, Joseph and I discuss the venerable 300 H&H Magnum in this episode. That is the original 30 caliber Magnum. The Super 30, or Holland's Super 30, as it was sometimes called, celebrates its 100th birthday in 2025 and has a rich history to accompany its distinguished pedigree. Joseph and I discuss the design of this cartridge, Joseph's experiences hunting with it and shooting with it at the range. We talk about some of his favorite loads and a few interesting stories involving this cartridge during this episode. Additionally, I also solicited questions from all my paying Patreon supporters to ask Joseph on the air during this episode. I selected one of those questions to start off our interview. Now, if you would like the potential opportunity to have a future podcast guest answer one of your questions in a future episode, join my Patreon community at patreon.com/biggamehunter or at the link in the episode description. Finally, make sure you are on my email list. If you like the podcast, you will love those emails I send out every weekday about hunting, shooting, ballistics, stuff like that. Sign up at the link in the episode description or at biggamehuntingpodcast.com/ebook. Okay, let's dive into things with Joseph about the 300 H&H Magnum. Good afternoon, Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
It's a pleasure, John. I always enjoy visiting with you.
Well, you are one of my most popular guests on the show, and it's been almost exactly a year since you were on last, so it's good to have you back. So you and I are talking about the 300 H&H in this episode. We'll get to that in a second, but first thing we're going to do is we're going to have you answer a question one of my Patreon supporters submitted for you. So I'll read you the question. We'll see what you think. I am looking forward to returning to Africa again for my 3rd time in 2027. I've used my Browning X-Bolt 300 Win Mag for everything I've hunted on my previous 2 trips to South Africa. This time, I hope to hunt Cape buffalo, giraffe, and a handful of plains game. I have 4 rifles I am trying to decide between. It is my intention to bring 2 of these rifles on my next trip. The 4 rifles are a 375 H&H bolt action built on a Bakusa BBK-02 action, a 416 Taylor built on a pre-64 Winchester Model 70, a 450-400 double rifle built on a Webley and Scott shotgun action converted by Pac Nor, and a bolt action Schmidt and Haberman in Brinicke 9.3 by 64. I'd relish hearing your opinions on which 2 rifles, if any, he would suggest.
Okay, John. So let me just ask a clarifying question here. Does he mean 2 of those 4, or does he mean one of those in addition to his 300 Win Mag?
It sounds like 2 of those 4, and he's hunting buffalo, giraffe, and plains game.
Okay. That's a little bit challenging because any of those obviously are suitable for Cape buffalo and giraffe. Mm-hmm. None of them, I'd say, are ideal for use on your average plains game species. Let's say you found a world-class impala out there at 400 yards. None of those are really going to optimize his chances. So I'd kind of like to answer this 2 ways. One is if he's planning to take his 300 for plains game plus one of these off this list. In that case, I would take your 416 Taylor, because it's a significantly more potent cartridge. It's built on one of my all-time favorite actions, the Pre-64 Model 70. Should be very reliable and very authoritative, and will work wonders on your Cape Buffalo and on your giraffe. Excuse me. Now, on the other hand, if he wants to take just 2 of the 4 listed, personally, what I would do is take the 375 loaded with probably some of the lighter weight range bullets, like a 260 grain Nosler AccuBond or a 270 grain Barnes tip triple shock bullet, but with a handful of 300 grain bullets that, for the Cape Buffalo, if he needed to transition to that. And I'd take the double rifle. Just too cool. The other nice advantage that gives you is you can have a tracker or somebody carry what I presume would be a scoped 375 with you while you're stalking Cape Buffalo. And this is something that most of the expert PHs will tell you. If you're hunting with a double-barreled express type rifle, you are going to give up some of the longer distance opportunities. So if you're trying for the biggest bull you can possibly find, and you may need to take a 125-yard shot, which, believe it or not, is quite far for a Cape Buffalo, you probably should have a scoped rifle, because an iron-sighted double-barrel rifle is pretty challenging to place shots carefully with at 125 or even 150 yards. That way, stalk close. If you can get close to the buffalo that you want to shoot with your double rifle, fantastic. Then you'll have your scoped 375 in a tracker's hand right behind you. If you find a world-class bull and he's out there a little too far for your iron-sighted or even red dot-sighted double gun, switch to the 375 and take that careful shot and bring home that buffalo. Plus, of course, in the absence of a classic plains game cartridge such as your 300 Magnum, the 375 can do pretty well out to a quarter mile or so, 400 yards. If you've practiced with your 375 and you have a fairly aerodynamic bullet in it, going at a reasonably fast speed, you'll be just fine on plains game inside any reasonable distance. That'd be my option.
Okay, very good choice. Now, for the listener who does not know what the heck a 416 Taylor is, it is a 4.58 Win Mag, neck down to 416 caliber. So it'll fit in a 30-06 linked action. Here's what it looks like. And it more or less mimics the performance of the old 416 Rigby. But you can get it in, a Winchester Model 70, for instance, like he does. Okay, very good, Joseph. So I thought that would be a very interesting question to start things off with here. That guy had a very specific and esoteric gun choices that I thought you would appreciate.
Absolutely. I like the way he thinks.
Okay, now to get down to the topic of the day, we're talking about the 300 H&H. I think a lot of people in the audience have heard about the 300 H&H, but may not know a lot of details about it. So can you give us a Reader's Digest version of the history of the cartridge, its performance specs, et cetera, and then we can dive into the details as necessary.
Absolutely. And there's some really good timing with this episode right now, because right now, this year, is the 100th birthday of the 300 H&H. Very cool. On a totally different note, it's my favorite of all the 30 caliber Magnums. That's not to say I think it's the best of them, but it's my personal favorite. Introduced in 1925 as a companion cartridge to Great Britain's 375 Holland Holland cartridge, it was designed to give the discerning sportsman a cartridge that would feed and feel very similar in loading and functioning to the 375 H&H, but was more ideally suited for plains game type purposes. I first became familiar with it myself as a pretty young lad. My old shooting mentor had a Pre-64 Model 70 Super Grade in 300 Holland Holland. Beautiful wood, interesting rifle. It had it was missing the butt pad. And this was because his father had suffered a crippling shoulder injury. The rifle had originally been his father's, that prevented him from shooting a traditional length stock. So he shortened everything up, and the best way to do that without actually damaging the collectible quality of his super grade was to just remove the butt pad from it.
Wow, so he was shooting this rifle with just the wood on his shoulder.
That's right, which I thought was a little crazy. I mean, you set that down a little too hard on concrete or something, it would probably chip that stock. So anyway, I lusted for that rifle for decades, and in 2013, I managed to convince my old shooting mentor to loan the rifle to me for a very good elk hunt in Utah on a CWMU, Controlled Wildlife Management Unit. And I went and shot what was at the time my biggest bull elk. He scored 315, but it was deceptive. He was a very, very big 315, real narrow. He should have laid out another 20 inches at least. So he really was the equivalent of a 340, 345 type bull in his antler mass, tine length, and so forth. Just a big, beautiful bull. Well, I borrowed this rifle from my old shooting mentor, and I didn't know how well it'd shoot, but I knew I wanted to protect the stock. So I screwed a good Packmeyer stock on there and very carefully fitted. I'd take it off to grind the pad because I wasn't about to risk grinding on that super grade stock. But I got the pad on there, fit just slightly proud so it would protect the wood and fit me better. Then I went to developing a hand load. And at the time I was using 180 grain Hornady Interbond bullets. And my first load shot really well, produced good velocity, very good accuracy. My 3-shot group at 100 yards was way less than an inch. And I thought, that's probably a fluke, but cool. Mm-hmm. And just for fun, I transitioned to a steel target I had at 500 yards, and I had my wife watching, so I have a witness. I fired 3 shots, and I could only see one smear in the middle of my target from that bullet hitting. We drove out there, and there were 3 distinct marks an inch and a half apart. It was an inch and a half group at 500 yards.
Whoa.
Unbelievable. And I have no doubt that it was probably another fluke, but suffice it to say that rifle shot very, very well. And a few weeks later, I took that bull with a single shot at about 130 yards in thick timber. Worked beautifully. And I had to give that rifle back, and that was the last time I've ever seen it. Sadly, my old shooting mentor, I became very old, got dementia, and last I heard, his daughter was looking after him, and all the guns were locked up somewhere. So I tried to talk him out of it many times, and he always said, when I'm old, I'll sell it to you. And now I don't think he remembers, but at least I had the pleasure of taking an elk with it.
I had the very first time I ever heard of the 300 H&H, I was elk hunting in Washington. I drew a pretty good branch antler bull tag there. So for those that aren't familiar with Washington, you can buy an elk tag over the counter, but for the most part, it varies depending on the unit that you're in. It's only spike elk. You can draw a cow tag, or you can draw a branch antler bull tag. I drew a branch antler bull tag hunting in this good unit. I didn't know anything about elk hunting. I was figuring things out, and I ran into this man that was about my age and his dad that were out there hunting together. And I got to talking to him and everything. And the old man had the tag, and I was like, "Oh, what are you hunting with?" He's like, "Oh, I'm hunting with the 300 H&H." And I said, "Okay, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about it. What are the ballistics like on that cartridge?" He says, "Well, I'm shooting a hand load that's like 180 grain Nosler partition at like 2950 feet per second." I was like, "Gosh, I'm hunting with a 300 Win Mag, and that's also what I'm using on this hunt." And so then further research after that led me down the path to, the 300 Win Mag was designed to give you 300 H&H performance out of a much shorter package.
Yes. So the 300 H&H, and for those of you that are watching, you can see I'm holding one up here, has a unique cartridge design that was optimized. Oh, you've got one too. Very cool.
This is a 375 H&H. So we can hold. We're looking at the family on the screen right now. Yeah.
So it was designed for the conditions of the time. These were originally loaded with cordite gunpowder, which was prone to pressure spikes in tropical temperatures. And so the designer, the British designer of the cartridge, gave it a lot of body taper and a long sloping neck. And that achieves 2 things. It makes it feed like butter. They're just so smooth. And then it enables it to extract very easily, even if it's at a pressure spike and a little bit of overpressure in that chamber. Now, with our modern propellants, that is not an efficient cartridge case design, right?
Yeah.
A modern cartridge case would have parallel sides or nearly parallel sides and a much steeper shoulder that is easier to get consistent head spacing on, no belt, and so forth. But for the time, this was a very, very well-designed cartridge. It has a little more internal case capacity than the 300 Win Mag, so hand loaders can get a bit more out of it, but factory ammo is loaded very similar to a 300 Win Mag. And, it mostly appeals to people with a love for classic cartridges. As you alluded to earlier, John, it's a full-length Magnum cartridge, so it does not fit in a 30-06 length action. And because of that, it's just not had the long-term popularity that some cartridges like the more versatile fitting 300 Win Mag does. It's pretty capable with a broad spectrum of bullet weights. I think 180 grains is pretty hard to beat, but I've hunted with bullets up to and including 220 grains in it, and I have some cool stories about that I can share with you a little bit later. But overall, just a very, very cool cartridge.
Now, this cartridge came out, you said, exactly 100 years ago, 1925, and for a long time, that was the 30 caliber Magnum. If you wanted something that was faster than a 30-06, that was your choice.
Yeah. And a competitive shooter, I believe, named Ben Comfort, if memory serves, won the Wimbledon Cup, which was a 1,000-yard national championship shoot at Camp Perry in around 1935. Again, if memory serves. I hope those numbers sound right to you.
That
John,
jives with the research I was doing before this episode, so yes.
Yeah, so that's about 10 years after the 300 H&H was introduced. Up to that point, the 30-06 dominated that match. When Ben Comfort won it with that cartridge, it launched here in the United States because suddenly serious shooters were aware of it and of its capabilities. So that was kind of when it really took off here. And before long, both Remington and Winchester were making rifles chambered in 300 H&H. They probably had been before then as well, but they were beginning to get popular. Kind of fun. After my old shooting mentor loaned me that rifle and I loved it so much, I began looking for my own. So I really wanted a super grade, but I couldn't afford one, right? So I started watching for a standard pre-64 Winchester in 300 H&H, and I found this one here that I'm showing for those of you watching in the Brownells Pro Shop in Iowa while they're at a media event. And this rifle had been very tastefully refinished. The wood had been. Presumably, the original Winchester had begun flaking at some point, and somebody thought, well, that's not nice, so they sanded it off. Well, as Winchester disciples will know, that pretty well dropped its collectible value way, way down. And I got it for a price that I could afford. Took it home, started shooting it. Just for kicks, loaded some 168 grain Sierra Match Kings that I had laying around. And the rifle wanted to shoot extremely well. It would shoot 2 touching and then it'd throw one out an 1.5 inches. And I thought, So I'd shoot a 4th, and it would be right there with the 2 touching. So I knew something was going on with the bedding or the forend. And reasoning that it had already been modified enough to lower the stock's value, I took it to an old gunsmith friend of mine named Roland Black. Now, Roland was the finest bedding guru I'd ever seen and ever have seen to this day. He glass bedded the action, tuned the trigger a little bit, free floated the forend, and I brought the rifle back. And to my delight, it is one of the most accurate rifles I own. I can put 220 grain Hornady round nose bullets in it, of all things, and on demand shoot a group of 1/2 inch or less at 100 yards. It's so much fun to do that with this fine old rifle, very typical, walnut stocked, blued steel rifle, controlled feed action, right next to guys shooting modern carbon fiber and state-of-the-art rifles that are struggling to shoot that well. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I had John Snow on the podcast recently talking about modern cartridge design.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned earlier, so that was episode 366 for anyone that wants to check it out. As you mentioned earlier, this is the absolute opposite of modern cartridge design. This is not optimized for accuracy, but it is optimized for reliability. The 375
Yes.
H&H is a very tapered case, and this is even more so with it being neck down like that. I've heard that is something like Wayne Van Zwol. I love reading his columns and whatnot, especially in Bugle when he still did it. And that would be a cartridge he would describe as slithering into the chamber when you would chamber
Yes.
it. But that's not to say that because it's not optimized for accuracy doesn't mean it can't be accurate as you're describing here. Now, you talked about using 168 grain, or was it 165 grain bullets?
168.
168. Yeah. You talked about using 180s, 200s, 220s. Does this cartridge do better, you think, with heavier bullets? Is it better suited to that? Or is it like a 30-06 or a 300 Win Mag where the whole spectrum is open to it?
You know, in my experience, it's shot just about everything that I've tried in it fairly well. Now, as always, it's important to tailor your bullet to the game you're going to hunt. Mm-hmm. And there are some interesting caveats here. This rifle, this specific rifle shoots, as mentioned, the 220 grain Hornady round nose bullets extremely well. It's a flat base bullet and it's fairly short. So it's really forgiving, right? It's not one of these long stretched out, highly aerodynamic bullets that are a little challenging to stabilize. It also shoots nozzler partition, 220 grain semi-round nose bullets reasonably well, but not as well. However, the partition is a much better bullet for across the spectrum use on game. And I'll share a little anecdote of why. In 2018, when the 300 PRC was being introduced, I went to Africa with a GA precision rifle chambered in 300 PRC, and with this rifle chambered in Holland Holland Super 30, which was the original name for it, right? This was the first 30 caliber Magnum. So I had the newest and the oldest 30 caliber Magnums, and I hunted with both of them.
Sounds like it was just made for a magazine article.
Oh, it was so much fun. I shot Inyala bulls with both of them, and I had a pair of loads for my 300 H&H, but just based on the spirit of what I was doing, I used the Hornady 220 grain round nose bullets. And funny enough, I'd been given 7 old cartridges cases for the 300 H&H that were marked 30 Magnum or 30 Super 30, something like that. I've still got them. Anyway, they predate any other 30 caliber Magnum because they were just marked 30 Magnum, right? Mm-hmm. And I loaded them all once and fired them to make sure they had enough integrity. They did. They shot great. So I took those 7 cartridges plus a bunch more, but I shot game with those 7 old vintage cases marked 30 Magnum. And I shot an Inyala at about 280 yards through both shoulders, and he just dropped on the spot when that 220 grain round nose hit him. That one exited. It would have slowed down a fair bit by then, so it didn't fragment and lose a lot of weight. A day or two later, I shot a bush buck. And as you know, John, they run, 90 to 110 pounds maximum.
Yeah, not very big animals.
Very small animals. This one was quartering to me. I shot him right on the point of the shoulder, and that bullet stopped in that bush buck. He was about 80 or 90 yards away, fairly close, high velocity impact, and that bullet was pretty well mangled. I recovered it. It was just shreds of jacket material and small chunks of lead. So if a 90 to 100 pound bush buck can stop a 220 grain round nose bullet, yeah, that makes me hesitant to use it on something like elk, where I could encounter a great big bullet 40 yards inside a thick timber and have to take a similar quartering 2 shot and break that shoulder. So I lean toward, in hand loads with a heavy bullet, I would lean toward the 220 grain nozzler partition, even though it's not quite as accurate for Western use, right? Mm-hmm. However, probably the most versatile bullet I use in this rifle is this one right here. This is a 180 grain Federal Trophy bonded tip bullet. And it just happens that this rifle shoots it very, very well. It's 3/4 inch average at 100 yards. And for factory ammo on a 300 H&H, that's pretty darn good. I don't think I need anything else in factory ammo for this rifle ever. I wouldn't choose to use 150s or 165s in a 300 H&H. It's kind of like, why?
Yeah.
You get plenty of velocity with the 180s and up. Anything in that 175, 180 grain weight range up through the 200s is probably the ideal balance of bullets.
About how fast of a muzzle velocity were you getting with that 220 grain round nose?
Oh, I'd have to go back and check my notes, but I think it was between 27 and 2,800 feet per second. I may be able to find it right here. 2,742 feet per second.
Yeah, so that's fast, but it's not screaming.
Right. That's about as fast as a 30-06. It's a little faster than a 30-06 shoots a 180. Mm-hmm. So you're gaining 40 grains of bullet weight and a little bit of speed.
Now, it's an interesting example that you make here on the Bushbuck, because there was another famous incident of a guy using a 300 H&H that had crummy penetration as well. That was what John Nosler shot his moose famously up in Canada with. And I've heard that he speculated afterwards how different it might have been if he had used, say, a 30-40 Krag or a 30-30 Winchester on that hunt instead, how different the world might be today.
Sure. And the fact is, back then in the 40s, they hadn't invented controlled expansion bullets yet. Mm-hmm. They were shooting bullets really designed for 30-40 Krag speeds, 2,000 to 2,200 feet per second at much, much higher velocities. And the bullets in their thin copper jackets just weren't holding up to it. I've got a similar story to, it's different from John Nosler's, but same sort of time period, I suspect, and just a great story. If I can share that with you.
Sure.
I've mentioned my old shooting mentor a couple times here, and this story came from him as well when we were sitting there and fondling his super great 300 H&H. I said, is this good for bears? And he's like, well, I have a story for you. And this is a true story. 3 doctors booked grizzly bear hunts all together, went together as friends, employed one guide. They all 3 bought brand new Model 70 Winchesters in 300 H&H back when it was the only 30 caliber Magnum. Sighted them in, arrived in Alaska, and they were greeted by their guide. He was carrying a Winchester lever action chambered in 4590 and loaded with 500 grain hard cast lead bullets. And of course, the 3 doctors couldn't help ribbing him just a little bit, saying, what are you carrying that old relic for? And he just smiled and said, well, you may find why I carry this old relic. Let's go hunting. Well, they got way out in the bush, and it took a while, as it used to do back in the day, but they got out into bear country and were glassing from a knob, kind of a rocky outcropping, and eventually found a big bear. And he was ambling along, as bears do, and was going to pass them at about 200 yards. And the guide said, okay, to the guy who had drawn the optimal straw, got the first shot. He said, you shoot. If your bear doesn't go down, I want your buddies to start shooting as well until that bear is down. And John, you know enough about hunting big, dangerous bears to understand why. They're hard to track, they're hard to recover, they're hard to find. And if you wound one, things can get western real fast. So the first guy shot, and the bear did what bears do when they're hit but not killed real fast. Whipped around, snarled, biting at his ribs. The other 2 guys joined in. The bear pinpointed the sound, and then the guys, and came for him from 200 yards. Now, I'm sure that all the shots didn't connect, but these rifles held 3 or 4 down, 300 H&H, which is tapered case. You can often get 4 into the magazine of a Model 70 Winchester. They all 3 emptied their guns on this incoming bear and didn't stop him. At that point, with the bear about 30 yards out and coming fast, the guide took a couple steps through the group of them that were sitting there shooting at this bear and standing offhand fired a single shot with his 45-90. That bullet took the bear under the chin, went through and connected into his spine, kind of between his shoulders. And as my old friend told it, it shattered 17 vertebrae as it traveled down the length of that bear's backbone. And of course, dumped him right on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy turned around with a grin and said, "That's why I shoot this old relic."
Oh my gosh.
I suspect, though, that these guys were using, non-controlled expansion bullets, and they were probably breaking up on this bear's shoulder. And, as I've recorded recently with another bear expert, Morris Milani of Alaska Arms, he's commented on a couple things that most people don't often factor in, and that's that a lot of bears are soaking wet. And so when you've got an inch or two of waterlogged bear hair, that will expand a bullet before it even contacts the hide. Or if he's caked in mud, it'll do the same thing. Or if he's got volcanic ash, which apparently is quite a thing out on the peninsula and some other areas, caked into his hair, it'll expand a thin jacketed bullet before it even contacts hide. Who knows what was happening with those guys or what bullets they were shooting. We didn't have that information, but great story. And, another really good recommendation for using a good controlled expansion bullet in a fast Magnum cartridge.
Like we mentioned, back then, if you're hunting in the 30s and the 40s and even into the 50s, you had a choice. You could hunt with Winchester, you could hunt with Remington ammunition, and the core lock was a little bit tougher than the PowerPoint, but there was no Barnes, there was no A-frame. The partition only came along after John Nosler's famous incident with it. I think that happened in 1948. So it took a few years for that to get out, and so this is a situation where you're hunting stuff with a real high velocity cartridge with some bullets that haven't caught up to it yet. I could certainly see those sort of things happening sometimes.
Sure.
Now, I am aware of just one factory load for the cartridge right now, 180 grain Nosler Accubon that they make at 2950 feet per second, which is basically 300 Win Mag ballistics out of it. And I'm sure that's a great bullet for anything you'd reasonably hunt with that cartridge. But the other nice thing is you can reload it with darn near any bullet, and there's plenty of good 30 caliber bullets of various construction, various weights out there too. What sort of powders have you had the best luck with hand loading?
I've used H1000. I've used IMR 7828. Anything in that kind of slow burning family. It's not optimized for really slow burners like Retumbo or something like that. You can use them, but really your best bet is the same family of cartridges that you would use in, let's say, a 300 Win Mag or a 300 PRC. Something like Reloader 23 or 26 would be very good as well. Sure.
Okay. Very, very good. Now, I'm looking at my Winchester handbook right now, and it has the number of rifles in different cartridges sold for the Model 70 from the time it was introduced in 1936 to 1943. 300 H&H number 5 behind 30-06. I mean, 30-06 has more than every other caliber combined.
Sure.
Then you have 270, 22 Hornet, 220 Swift, and then the 300 H&H. And it's a big drop off from the 300 H&H to anything past that. And I'd imagine that it probably carried on doing all right for a little bit post World War II. But all bets were off when the Winchester Magnum started coming out in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, I think the 300 Winchester Magnum was really kind of not the death knell for the 300 H&H, but it certainly put it into kind of a senior respected classic category because it had more modern cartridge design principles. I mean, at the time, they hadn't yet gotten completely away from belts in Magnums. Well, we still haven't, right? But
yeah.
At that point, the 300 H&H had been serving very well for many decades, and I think it was too entrenched among people that love the classics to ever entirely go away. So, yeah, I think it'll keep on serving in the hands of people like me that just enjoy hunting with something a little bit special. I have a 300 PRC, and I have no hesitation in admitting that it's a superior cartridge in design. It just is. Unless you were to go back to loading cordite and take it tiger hunting in India in 110 or 115 degree temperatures. Then suddenly the 300 H&H would be again where it's at. Of course, nobody's hunting with cordite these days either. For those of you listening that aren't familiar with it, cordite is a stranded, it's a gunpowder that's made in strands that were inserted into the cartridge case almost like chunks of spaghetti noodle. And it was quite temperature sensitive. And so when fired in a hot rifle in hot conditions, it could have a pressure spike and lock your bolt up unless you had that significant taper in your cartridge case.
Yeah, a load that was perfectly safe to shoot at 45 degrees Fahrenheit in Great Britain would have big problems in a lot of parts of Africa or India when it was really hot, potentially with a pressure spike like that.
Yes.
I, as a kid, sometimes liked to pull bullets out of cartridges, dump the powder out, and set fire to it. And one time I tried doing that with a 303 British cartridge, and I was like, "What the heck is this? This isn't powder. What are these straws doing in here?" And that I was like, "Oh, that. I've heard of cordite before. That is what that is." Now, you've talked about hunting and shooting with a Model 70. Are you aware of any other rifles that were commonly made in 300 H&H?
Yeah. Well, the post 64 Model 70s were for a while, and there were some Remingtons, quite a few made in 300 H&H. And from what I understand, they shoot quite well. I mean, a lot of those early Remingtons just did. They had good barrels. They were well built, still kind of being, if not hand fit and tuned, they were still being made at the end of that golden era of very fine craftsmen. And so, the Remington rifle, bolt action rifle in 300 H&H is certainly a good rifle for me, just because of the cartridge's heritage, hunting in tropical and subtropical climates in Africa and India. It just feels appropriate to chamber it in a controlled feed action. And so that's why when I began looking for a rifle to buy and hunt with until I can't drag it around anymore, I really wanted a pre-64 Model 70 Winchester.
That seems like the sort of, I don't know if they ever did, but that seems like the sort of rifle that rifle cartridge Ruger might have made in the number 1 at some point as well.
Actually, I had one.
Oh, okay.
in Ruger number 1, and that's that was a story of one of the ones that got away that I wish hadn't. This would have been in about 2011. Ruger did they often just do a single year in a certain cartridge in the number 1. And sure enough, they built that 300 H&H in the number 1 with a 26-inch barrel. And they sent me one for use on a mule deer hunt in New Mexico on kind of a subspecies desert mule deer, not big desert mule deer, a little bit smaller. And I went and did a hunt. That was kind of a interesting experience. I got some factory ammo seconds that didn't shoot well at all. And at first I was thinking, okay, I got a 5 MOA rifle here. And then I got some of the same stuff that was not factory seconds. And that rifle was a legitimate 1-inch shooter, which isn't common for a Ruger number 1. And then I got some of this stuff from Federal, and it shot fantastic as well. Long story short, I shot a nice buck with that rifle and absolutely should have kept it, but the price, even the rider price for what was at this point a used gun, was more than I thought I should responsibly spend, because I had 2 little children. My son was only a few months old, and he'd gone through a hospital experience that still haunts me, and we had some fairly significant bills. I was selling guns instead of buying guns at that point to try and pay hospital bills, and so I didn't buy it, but I still wish I had that rifle.
Gosh,
really good one.
Yeah, it is interesting to talk to people that have been in just shooting for years and years, and there's always those got away stories. Like, man, I had that rifle and I should not have sold it.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, you've talked about hunting elk, inyala, bushbuck, this mule deer. Any other interesting hunting stories you could share with us involving the 300 H&H?
Not personally. I carried it in Africa, hoping to shoot a zebra with it. It didn't occur. So, yeah, I think that's about all the species I've taken with the 300 H&H. But the fact is, folks, if you've got one that shoots a good 30 caliber bullet accurately, it will obviously kill just like any other 30 caliber Magnum. Once that projectile is out the bore, it really doesn't matter what cartridge you launched it with. If your projectile choice is good, it will work effectively.
Does it commonly have a 1 in 10 inch twist rate on it, like a 30-06 or 300 Win Mag?
As far as I know, yes. As far as other factory rifles that you can purchase chambered in 300 H&H, I think it's almost a boutique cartridge at this point. You're going to find the used rifles, and then you'll find really fine rifles built in it. I know Park West Arms, which used to be Dakota Arms, build some really nice rifles. We're talking, $5,000 and up for beautiful piece of walnut and finely built rifle, kind of based on the Mauser type action. Funny enough, the 300 H&H is a favorite of hill country rifles in Texas. They have a appreciation for some of the classics. 35 Wellen is another of their favorites. And so they'll build you a good rifle on a Remington Model 700 action is one of the, the few that's long enough to just chamber it in any, Magnum bolt face. It'll work. Lex Webernick with Rifles Inc. will build you a 300 H&H that's really nice. Ultra lightweight mountain rifle if you want. Winchester Classic type. So you can still get them, folks, but it's more of a aficionados type of 30 caliber Magnum.
Yes, I had a guy on my email list that emailed. He was also a podcast listener that emailed me wanting. I think it inherited a 300 H&H and was having a hard time finding ammo. And I was like, yeah, like you either need to find this Nosler stuff, and they probably make one run a year of it, or you need to learn how to hand load and start doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, there is one downside to hand loading the 300 H&H, and that's because of that long sloping neck, the brass stretches a lot. So when you're using your brass over and over, theoretically it'll wear out faster than something like a 300 Win Mag or especially a 300 PRC. But the fact is, most folks aren't shooting high volumes through their 300 H&H. You can, certainly, but if you've got 100 cases, they're probably going to last you 6 or 8 loadings instead of 10 or 12. And that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And fortunately, Nosler has been very good about supporting a lot of the more esoteric cartridges like that a lot of other companies don't support. And you may not always be able to find it, but you can often get it if you look hard enough for it.
Sure.
Now, it seems like this is a cartridge that really appeals to people that like vintage cartridges or really fine rifles like that. And it seems like your options are you can go with one of these custom or semi-custom builds you talk about, or spend some time on Gunbroker and see if you can dig up an old Winchester, for instance.
Yeah. And you can find 300 H&Hs on Gunbroker at any given time. You got to be willing to spend what people are asking for them, right? And go through the process of supplying your FFL and so forth. But it's not too hard. And I mean, as a matter of fact, if you want a custom rifle, even that isn't very difficult. You just put a new barrel on a Remington 700 and you're good to go. For discerning riflemen that want the cartridge for what it is, I still, of course, this is the route I took, so of course I'm going to recommend it to everybody, but I really think the quintessential 300 H&H is a pre-64 Model 70 or a fine custom rifle built on some kind of a controlled feed action, whether it's from Park West Arms or something really superb by a one-of-a-kind maker like Joe Smithson, J.P. Smithson Guns, he'll build you a $15,000 rifle that you'll want to take to your grave with you.
Now, that seems like an interesting idea to do things, to take two pre-64 Model 70s to Africa, one in 300 H&H and another in 375 H&H, and have a mixed bag hunt for buffalo, plains game, etc., with those two old, beautiful rifles with those two vintage cartridges as well.
I think that's a really good plan, John. We should like schedule that.
Well, so you have the pre-64 model 70 and 300, right? So I just need to dig up one in 375.
Yeah, I actually have a neighbor that has a pre-64 in 375 Holland Holland that's pristine condition. Too pristine for my wallet, or I'd have bought it from him. He's older and he would sell it, but I can't pay him what it's worth, and I don't want to. Well, he's savvy enough; he wouldn't let me take advantage of him, even if I could. But
but even if you could,
do that.
It wouldn't be a nice thing to do to him.
That's right. Yep.
All right.
Now,
very good.
You can get a Winchester Safari Express modern-made rifle in 375 H&H. They're fairly readily available. So that's, you could do a new 375 H&H and a vintage 300 H&H.
I have a client that has a pre-64 Model 70 in 375. He went and hunted and killed a buffalo with it, and it was a beautiful rifle. That guy knows guns.
Very nice.
Among other things, he has a Dumoulin Mauser and 400 Whalen that he's also killed a buffalo with.
Was that the original chambering in that
no,
rifle?
It was he rebarreled and rechambered it to that specifically for that. My goodness, I'd never heard of that cartridge until he was telling me about it, and it's too bad things didn't work out with that one because that seemed like it was a heck of a round if things would have worked out properly with it. But that's neither here nor there to the 300 H&H. Anything else we need to talk about with the 300 H&H before we wrap up, or have we pretty well covered it?
I think that pretty well covers it. I mean, the takeaway for me is I think it's the classiest 30 caliber Magnum there is. Mm-hmm. I think it tends to be more accurate than it has any right to be based on its case design. It's absolutely the smoothest feeding 30 caliber you'll ever run because of that long sloping neck and the body taper. It's one of those few cartridges where in a bolt action, you probably can't tell whether or not a cartridge fed. It's that smooth. It's just effortless. It'll always extract because of those features as well. And it's capable of taking anything, on the North American continent. My grizzly bear story earlier notwithstanding, choose your right bullet, right? It's all about fitting the projectile to the game. And, if you show up in a hunting camp anywhere around the world with a 300 H&H, your guides are going to admire it, and they'll know you're a bit of a discerning guy who understands and appreciates cartridges for what they are and for the history as well. It's still the first 30 caliber Magnum ever designed. And in reality, it's as good as it ever was, and probably better now because we can put premium controlled expansion bullets in it.
Well, very good. And that is a theme that we have seen with a lot of cartridges that are really old, 270, 30-06, etc. in recent years. As bullet and rifle manufacturing technology has improved, we get new cartridges, but it also makes those old cartridges even more accurate and even more effective on game.
Yes.
So as we wrap up with our interview today, I'm going to ask you the question I'm asking everyone on the podcast. You must choose one to hunt with for the rest of your life. Either a single cartridge, and you can hunt with any bullet in that cartridge if you choose that cartridge, or a single bullet, and you can use that single bullet type in any cartridge. What is your selection, cartridge or bullet, and which specific cartridge or bullet would you choose?
You are a cruel, cruel man, John.
It is. I've gotten that response a lot from people this year.
Gosh, that is a tough one. I think I would probably choose a specific bullet, but that's like choosing one of my kids because I love tinkering with and playing with different bullets. for a variety of makes and so forth. It would probably be a Barnes tip triple shock, because you can get that from 22 center fire right up through the 416s. You can hunt anything in the world with it, with a variety of weights, and they tend to be very accurate. They're reliable no matter what you're shooting them at. But yeah, it really hurts my soul to have to tell you just one, John.
That's the thing. It's not an easy question, but it really makes you think, though, doesn't
Yes.
it? Now, most people have opted for a single cartridge. You are one of a handful that has chosen a single bullet like that, and that can be a much better way of doing it. It gives you a lot of flexibility with things, because, like you said, a 223, 300, a 375. You can use it in your 300 H&H if you so chose.
Absolutely. Yep. I kind of anything from a 22 Hornet or probably a 204 Ruger up through the 416 Magnums and all my favorite elk cartridges and antelope cartridges and whatnot. Yeah.
So as we wrap up, tell us where people can go to learn more about you and the content you are putting out.
Sure. So my full-time gig is as a writer. I've been writing for shooting and hunting magazines for, 25 years now. Full-time right now with Peterson's Hunting, Shooting Times Magazine, Rifle Shooter Magazine, and I write a lot for Guns and Ammo special interest publications. Those are the newsstand-only magazines. On a more personal level, I own and host the Backcountry Hunting Podcast, where we talk about everything related to hunting, but kind of a focus on DIY stuff and the deep country, backcountry themes, but we do international stuff, a lot of rifle, ballistics, cartridge, bullet choice, and so forth. I do a little YouTube channel with my son, William. He goes by the Backcountry Apprentice handle, and he's doing all our editing on the YouTube channel. He's not old enough to legally appear on it without getting the channel demonetized. But follow us along on the Backcountry Hunting Podcast YouTube channel. We have a lot of fun there. And I also co-host with Ron Spomer on Ron Spomer Outdoors. His is a much, much bigger YouTube channel. It's a real privilege and honor to work with him, and we have some good times there.
Yeah, you take your channel and add it to my channel and multiply it times 5. His is still bigger than ours.
Yes. But he's a great guy. Ron is so easy to work with. He's just a splendid human.
Well, definitely. And it is funny. You talk about working with your magazines. Quite often I'll be reading an article and I'll get halfway through it. I was like, man, this sounds like Joseph. And I'll go look at the byline and it is yours. So your podcast is one of a handful of hunting podcasts I do listen to. I know a lot of my audience already listen to it, and I encourage those of you who are not to go check it out if you enjoy the stuff I put out here. So I will put a link to that. I'll put a link to that in the episode description. You can go check it out. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Joseph. It is always a pleasure talking to you.
It's a privilege, John. I really appreciate it.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that discussion. If you want more from Joseph von Benedikt, make sure you check out some of his previous appearances on the show. Episode 315, we talk about the best caliber for hunting darn near anything. We talk about his experiences hunting bighorn sheep in episode 174. We talk about moose hunting in episode 162. We talk about caribou hunting in episode 130. And we talk about elk hunting rifles and bullets in episodes 96 and 104, respectively. Those were all awesome shows. Be sure you check them out. And also be sure to check out Joseph's podcast, the Backcountry Hunting Podcast, and his Instagram account. Links to both of those are in the episode description as well. And remember, if you would like the potential opportunity to have a future podcast guest answer one of your questions, join my Patreon community at patreon.com/biggamehunter or at the link in the episode description. And finally, don't forget to sign up at biggamehuntingpodcast.com/ebook to get that free ebook on the best hunting cartridges and to join my email list. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.